so let's move on. The next tab that's down here after we've taken care of our boundary conditions is the numerics. In general, you probably don't want to mess with most of this stuff unless you have a gigantic simulation. So by default, it uses a solver called the mumps solver. Mumps is a direct solver, meaning that it's actually going to form a full matrix and then, basically do the equivalent of Gauss elimination via a parallel solver to do that. Now that process is quite inefficient if you have a lot of elements. I would say if you have more than I'd say 5 million is about the cutoff. If you have more than about 5 million unknowns that you're solving for, you probably want to use one of these other solvers like PETS or whatever, PETSC, that have iterative solvers that are more memory efficient. But generally, these are pretty good settings by default. I would start with the default settings. Moving on to simulation control. So the maximum runtime is basically how long it will run and try and get the solution. If it doesn't get a solution in this amount of time, it will abandon things. Similarly, for the number of processors, this is how many CPUs it's going to try and use in parallel. I generally let it automatically assign these unless you know what to assign. Otherwise, you can end up using lots and lots of core hours. Results controls is the next tab, and this is something that you don't want to skip. So result controls are specific results that are usually a summary of something that you actually care about. So like in this simulation, for example, I might care about the maximum temperature in the fins because that might correspond to, how much the computer chips are heating up or something like that. So I might care, for example, about what's the maximum temperature in, let's say, these aluminum nitride heaters. That's a good thing to know. So I might request that it outputs that number, both the minimum and the maximum temperature in here. And in fact, let me rename that to the max T for the 20 watt heater. And then similarly, I might want to know that number for the other heater as well. You can, of course, go back and look at these things point by point and inspect them later. But actually, these are going to prove very useful for checking the convergence of your results when you're done. One of the things that you're going to want to do for every simulation is check whether your solution is mesh independent. And the only way to do that is to compare apples to apples. So in this case, we'll compare the maximum temperature predicted on this for a couple of different meshes and make sure that they don't change, for different meshes to within a certain tolerance. That might be one thing that you care about. That's probably the primary thing you care about. Another thing I might care about as a result is the temperature on the upper surface of these fins. That'll tell me something about whether the temperature is either close to the temperature of the heaters or whether it's close to the temperature of the the free stream surface, which is exactly what I don't want if I'm trying to design, let's say, the length of a fin, for example. So I might do an area calculation and calculate, let's say, the average temperature on, let's say, one or more of these fins. So I guess I could do it over all of I could do the average over all of these if I wanted to, or I could just pick one. Whatever. So this will be the upper fin temperature, let's say. I might care about that as well. Okay, but it's a good idea to select something. If you're not selecting any result control, then it probably means you don't actually need the simulation to produce any numbers, because this is really usually outputs the thing that you care about. Thing that you care about is not usually the pretty picture.